Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 4 of the Isle of Man Sports Podcast. Okay, so we've had some fantastic guests and they just keep getting better. Today we've got Andy Varnom. So just to give you a little introduction, Andy Varnom, I've known him for many years now, working through Manx Sport and Recreation, and he's been established here for quite some time. He now works for the Island Games Association. And Andy, what's your role at the Island Games Association? If you can just give us a bit of background to that, please.
Yeah, I actually work for the international side. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's the International Island Games Association. So I'm actually working for 23 islands. So although I'm based in the Isle of Man, in theory, I could be based in Menorca or Bermuda or the Falkland Islands. But I'm actually the one employee of the IIGA. I work part-time in the mornings. It's very good that the government provide us with a free office because we're a charity, and I work here at the NSC.
Fantastic. No, it's just great having you around. I suppose it's great to have a familiar face there working in the Island Games Association. But before we sort of delve into that, Andy, just can you give us a little bit of background to yourself, where you're from, how you came to the Isle of Man, and what's brought you over here and into this position?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate to have a great career in sport management and administration. I started when I was 18 in my hometown of Rochdale, Lancashire, and my first job was as a recreation assistant. It was a bit like a sports development officer before the term had even been invented.
Right.
It goes back that far. And I worked for my hometown in Rochdale. I moved across all kinds of facility management to do with the outdoor sports facilities. It was a large borough. It was over 200,000 people. And I eventually moved into indoor facility management. My first job on that side was at the old Central Baths in Rochdale.
Right.
And I was secretary of the Sports Council, organised an annual festival of sport. It was a great opportunity to get involved in all kinds of things to do with sport. And then I moved over to Burnley, staying in Lancashire, only 13 miles away, but quite a lot different, to Rochdale.
So how is that different in Burnley?
It's quite interesting, the cultural side of it. Burnley was known at the time as one of the top local authorities for sport and recreation in Lancashire. That was my reason for moving there. And they had what was the largest indoor sports facility, the William Thompson Recreation Centre in the town centre of Burnley, and everybody in Lancashire knew about that facility. Right. And so that was what attracted me over there. It was a little bit restricted in that I was mainly involved with facility management. At the time, the UK government brought something called compulsory competitive tendering, which meant that you had to allow private firms to come in and compete to run. And so it was an exciting time, and I stopped there for 8 years before I came to the Isle of Man.
Right, and never looked back since.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. So what was your role in the Isle of Man when you first came here, Andy?
I came over in 1998, just as the NSC had been built. The swimming pool was already open. The sports hall the main sports hall had just opened before I arrived. And I think really they wanted someone with experience of facilities like that to come across, and I was originally called the National Sports Manager.
Right.
Quite a grand title. But what attracted me to the post, as well as coming across here and being interviewed and seeing the NSC, how could you not be impressed?
Absolutely, fantastic facility.
And but was the opportunity to get involved in a lot more, with the Isle of Man not being part of the UK, and therefore this thing called the Island Games, being involved with the Commonwealth Games, and then this thing, Manx Sport and Recreation, which was In its early days, it had just changed from being Manx Sports Development to Manx Sport and Recreation, and the opportunity to really build up the sports development side of MSR was a major factor as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I've said to people for many years, I came over and managed to get the best job in the world. So
fantastic, very good. Not many people can say that, hey?
I think Paul Bragson does nowadays, although he might be changing his mind a little. He's got a few problems on his plate with the NSC pool and things at the moment, yeah.
Well, there always challenges around the corner, isn't there? And it's all about getting through them, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. So that brings us on now to your position in the International Island Games Association. So, I mean, obviously, you're also involved with Island Sports, aren't you, on the committee there as well, and now you're involved with the International Island Games Association. What was the attraction to get involved with that role?
Well, I took early retirement. Things were changing in government in 2013, so I left the NSC and MSR, and I was really fortunate. I'd been on the executive committee of the Island Games Association for a number of years, so I've been involved, and I've been fortunate to attend every games from Gotland in '99 until present day. So I obviously loved everything about the games, and still do. And when this opportunity came to take on this position, Kay Batty, who did it previously, was retiring, and I thought, well, great, it allows me to stay in sport, gives me something to do, and I've been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years.
Excellent. I mean, it must be quite a challenge. I mean, like you mentioned before, the number of sort of islands involved, but not only the number of islands, but how far out they're spread. I mean, just give us a bit of context to the distance from the furthest away to the nearest, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about the games. That's originally back in 1985, you know, the first games were here in the Isle of Man, were still the spiritual home, and that's why I'm based here. That's why the headquarters are here in the Isle of Man. And perhaps initially, Jeff Corlett, and backed up by Noel Kringle, were the real forefathers of the games, if you like. And I think it originally came from Viking links, with British islands and through to Scandinavian islands. But nowadays, we've gone into the Mediterranean. We have Menorca and Gibraltar. We did have Rhodes, but unfortunately for different circumstances, Rhodes have now left what we call our games family. Might come back again at some point. And then we've gone over to the Americas. That's Bermuda and Cayman joined a few years later. That's brought in something completely different to the games. I
can imagine travelling through time zones and dealing with extreme heat, and because they have hosted as well, haven't they? One of them.
Bermuda hosted in 2013, and that was a lot different. Obviously, it was a bit expensive for people to get out to Bermuda, because that's the thing about the Island Games, is that every competitor has to pay their own travel, accommodation and food. So Bermuda was smaller games, competitor-wise, still well over 1,000 competitors, so still a very big event, and a great event as well. Yeah. Cayman are looking towards hosting the games in the future, but that won't be for quite a few years. And then, of course, we have the other interesting places as well. We've got the largest island in the world, Greenland.
Right.
And we've also got St Helena and the Falkland Islands, and as you can imagine, their competitors have one hell of a journey to get to the games.
Is it right that they have to get a boat to the Ascension Islands and then transfer or something like that? Is it quite a trek?
It was, except for St Helena.
Yeah.
But St Helena's got a brand new airport that opened early this year.
Very
the problem we've got now is the flights are extremely expensive to go to South Africa and then on to London, and then from there they have to get to Gibraltar or Gotland or wherever it is as well. So it's made it a lot quicker for them, because as you was alluding to, they used to have to get on the boat that's at Service Centre Lena, and depending on whether it was going north or south, they had to go to Ascension or to Cape Town, and it used to take them about 15 days to get to a Games.
Crikey. We sometimes struggle with the concept of getting across the Irish Sea to the UK. I mean, that's some trek that they've got to go through there. That's unreal.
It is. And but again, it's those kind of islands, those different cultures that make the Games what it is.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the culture of the Island Games, I suppose it's very different from place to place. I mean, how much do we benefit from experiencing those different cultures, do you think, as we travel around to the different host nations?
Tremendously. You've only got to... I was listening to a podcast from the Isle of Wight the other day, and it was a table tennis manager, and he was talking about he'd been to the Games years ago, and then he'd sort of retired from table tennis and put on a lot of weight, took it back up again and has started going. But just listening to him talking about their team and the camaraderie and meeting people from all these different cultures and islands, and they do become friends for life.
It very much is a friendly games. I mean, I've attended 3 myself as a competitor in my younger days, and I didn't go anywhere too exotic. I think the Isle of Man, when we hosted it in 01, and Jersey and Guernsey, but Jersey and Guernsey are beautiful places, and it was fantastic to have that opportunity to go and visit there as well. And you know, very close kin to us, I suppose, as an island nation. But again, you've got that sort of French twist over there as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously we've got a lot of British islands, and as you said, the Crown dependencies, overseas territories. The Scandinavian islands bring perhaps, you know, the language situation, even though English is the official language of the Games, and I think most people who are Scandinavians are very good at speaking English, and this kind of thing. But again, quite a different culture. We have Norwegian islands, an Estonian island, Swedish, Finnish. So it does bring quite a broad spectrum to the whole Games family.
Absolutely. No, it's fantastic. I mean, how do you feel the sort of Games has helped sport, I suppose, for these islands? Do you think it gives them any more advantages or pathways for athletes and coaches for the development and improvement?
Yeah, I'm certain it has, and there's plenty of examples. I mean, from a legacy point of view, the facilities is always the main one that's quoted. I mean, we look at the NSC. I'm sure the NSC would have happened without the Games, but the fact that the Isle of Man were hosting the Games in 2001 and the NSC indoor facilities, you know, Mike Ball, who was my boss, who was the director when I came over, said that made a massive difference when you're taking reports to government committees and asking for millions of pounds for new facilities. If you can throw in, and we're going to host this massive event in 2001, and we'll have the opportunity to host it again, because hopefully it'll be coming again in 2027.
Yeah, so believe. Fantastic. And it must be a real boost for the economies of these islands when they host as well, in terms of bringing trade in and people, you know, experiencing the sort of more tourist side of the islands as well, and hoteliers, etc.
Certainly the latest Games a few weeks ago in Gibraltar was absolutely full. You just couldn't get accommodation. A lot of the spectators had to stay in Spain and come across the border every day. When, for instance, the Games were here in 2001, you know, the first thing you do is go to the tourism and people and say, when's the best weeks to do the Games for the Isle of Man? You know, when are the hotels at the quietest? You know, you're not going to do it TT fortnightly and this kind of thing. So you, in that respect, for, you know, the hotels and the restaurants, cafes and this kind of thing, you're picking a quiet week and bringing in an extra, you know, a lot of business for them as well. So it's got to help the economy. I think the legacy thing, there's all kinds of things, you know, the big volunteers. Nowadays we don't have volunteers, we have games makers, and that all comes from the Olympics in London in 2012. When we had the volunteers here in 2001, and then of course we had the Commonwealth Youth Games here in 2011, which I was fortunate enough to be involved in that as well. You know, databases of people whose become volunteers, and hopefully they'll be the future volunteers for events on the island. Some of them will hopefully become administrators, technical officials. The sports are always looking for, whether it's scorers, secretaries, or whatever. That so there's that kind of legacy as well, rather than just the bricks and mortar of new facilities.
'Cause, I mean, that buzz that it generates in an island, I mean, knowing it from working in the Commonwealth Youth Games and the games over here, it's amazing, and people come in their droves to get behind these events and support them, and it amazes me the commitment and the work and the time that these volunteers put into these events. It just wouldn't happen without them, would it?
And like I said, the buzz, people still talk about it, still see people around the island who've got the polo shirts and jackets from 2001 and 2011. Amazingly, I went down for a weekend in London last year, and I was walking down near Leicester Square somewhere, and two people came past with the 2011 jackets on, and I was so amazed I didn't get a chance to sort of stop them and say hi. It was just amazing to see those in London.
Well, it certainly helps put the Isle of Man on the map in a lot of places, doesn't it, in a lot of people's eyes, as it does with the other countries as well. Perhaps we would never have heard of a lot of these Scandinavian islands had it not been for the Island Games, and I'm sure it's helped those islands become holiday destinations for locals over here as well.
I'm sure so. I mean, when I came over for the interview for this job, they mentioned the Island Games, which I had to admit I'd not heard of, and they said this was in '98, and they said you may have the opportunity to go to the games in Gotland in '99, and I must admit I had to go home and get the atlas out. So, where on earth is Scotland? This was how long ago. That wasn't. You didn't Google it in those days. You actually got a book out and looked at a map. But that's correct. I'm sure. And the, as I say, we call it the family all the time, the friendly games, because it genuinely is. I've been fortunate to be involved in the Commonwealth Games as well over the years, and that's very much the friendly games, and they use the tag as well. And that's the great thing about it. But as you say, the Isle of Man, the rest of the islands are very conscious that the whole thing came out of the year of sport in 1985 that the Isle of Man put together. One of the first things I was given when I got to the Isle of Man was Jeff Corlett's scrapbook of the 80. It was so impressive, everything that had happened. And that was the birth of the Island Games.
That's amazing. It's from small beginnings, and I mean, how many islands were involved in '85? It wasn't too many, was it? And it's really grown since then.
I think it was around 10. I should know exactly, but and as you said, nowadays we're running with 23 islands. One of the difficulties we are wrestling with all the time is the size of the games and which islands can accommodate them. Literally, accommodation is a bigger problem than sports facilities. Yeah. Even when the Isle of Man comes to host again in 27, unless there's a massive change in accommodation in the island, we will have a lot less of the boarding houses, the 3-star hotels which competitors can afford that want to use. We will have a lot less than we had in 2001.
It's possibly not as simple as setting up campsites like TT and having homestay either, is it? Because I mean, athletes need a certain level of comfort and accommodation to be able to perform at their peak.
Well, you'd say so, but some of the islands that come have not got a lot of money,
right?
And some do camp, and some go into hostel type accommodation.
Right.
There's some great stories over the years about competitors stopping in sort of old army barracks in Gibraltar in '95, in Gotland in '99, and this kind of thing.
Yeah, so I believe with the school dormitories and things like that have all been utilised just to get people over and accommodated.
Still a massive part of the games. We're going to Guernsey next in 2021, and then we go to Orkney in 23. And can you imagine, Orkney's not full of you know, big hotels, we'll have some very nice schools, modern ones, that can be made into dormitory accommodation quite easily.
Very good. So there's all sorts of innovative solutions to these problems. I believe I heard we won. Was there talk of a cruise ship being used for accommodation?
We've actually used cruise ships in Shetland in 2005. It was a bit unfortunate that they needed more than one, but they didn't need two.
Right.
And the second one was only about a third full. So financially, it was a bit of a problem, and it has actually put off other islands from trying to use cruise ships. Gibraltar originally, for the 2019 games, were going to have a cruise ship because of the limited accommodation. But when they were quoted something like £5 million to hire a cruise ship, that quickly was taken off the agenda.
I can imagine. I don't think anyone's coffers are going to be fluttering out that sort of money. So let's have a look at, I suppose, the performance side of the games. I mean, there must have been some real notable sort of athletes that have come through the games that may have gone on to do bigger and better things over the years. Can you give us any examples, perhaps, of any of those?
Yeah, the one that always springs to mind was the Manx missile, Mark Cavendish, who in Guernsey in 2003, I knew who Mark was because I was involved with the Sports Council at the time, and I knew he was going up through the sort of British academies and going across with Dr. Tilbury to a lot of events. But I think that was Cav's first ever experience of a multi-sport games, and I always remember we were on the seafront in Guernsey, and the Criterion was, if not the last, one of the last events of the week, on a lovely Friday evening. And typical Cav, as we have now found out from all his experience, the Jersey guy was in front and he stuck his arms up to say, "I've won the race." And he didn't, of course, because Cav shot under his sort of arms and pinched it on the line.
Fantastic.
And as I said, that was one of the events that really sort of kicked off Cav's career, because we shouldn't underestimate that going to a multi-sports event is fantastic grounding for these competitors for going on to perhaps Commonwealth Games, Olympics. That experience of staying overnight in a team and mixing with people from other nations. I always remember our swimmers back in 2002 Commonwealth Games saying that they were in the relay final and sort of Ian Thorpe and the Aussies were in the next lane, and they were saying what an incredible experience. And the only thing that they'd ever done similar to that was go to the Island Games. So
it's a real stepping stone, isn't it, of learning and getting that experience of that. I suppose as well as anything, as well as the village side of things, it must be a real experience of a step up in level. And going through things like call room processes and all of the official accreditation side of things, and there's a lot more to it than simply rocking up at a track or a pool and getting in and doing your thing, isn't there? Yeah,
the whole experience of the week, and not only for the competitors but for the officials as well. I mean, it's great to see so many Manx people at these games. We were out in Gibraltar, and Christine Callow, who's normally the referee for the swimming at the games, they were a bit short in turn judges, so she was going around looking for Manx people who'd come across as spectators, perhaps parents and this kind of thing, and commandeering them to be a turn judge for the week. And we have technical committees for every sport, and that's one of my jobs, to keep in touch with these technical committees, and we have our own sports bylaws that we have to amend and keep on top of. And there's quite a lot of Manx people involved, and over the years, so it just shows what a great sort of sports administration that we've have on the island as well.
No, for sure. I mean, it's much more. Ultimately, we want to see athletes get out there, do well, enjoy their sport, and be as successful as they can be. But equally, it's a great experience for all the volunteers and the officials not just enjoy the experience of the games, but to develop themselves as officials as well, and to it can often springboard them onto high levels of competition as well for their experience as an administrator and official in sport.
Yeah, and I mentioned sort of the coaching side of it, which, as you well know, Trevor, in your position, is becoming more and more important, and perhaps a little bit more professional, and this kind of thing. And one of the problems we have with the numbers now is that, teams want to bring a number of coaches with them. Yeah. Now, as I said, the great thing about the Island Games as well, perhaps different to the Olympics and things, is that the coaches come along and have to double up as team managers, or look after the younger competitors and this kind of thing. And I don't think they mind doing that. Everybody literally mucks in together and sorts everything out. But certainly, I think it's a great advantage for local coaches to be able to attend these events. Most of them have been competitors at some point anyway, but they've probably seen how much the games have progressed over the years. Yeah.
So I suppose looking on to the future, do you see the Island Games developing in any ways or changing in any ways? Are there any sort of I suppose opportunities for more islands to get involved, or more sports to get involved and things like that?
It's really difficult because, as I said, the main limitation we have all the time is that, our largest island is Greenland, but you probably, I won't say never, but they've got a very small population. That's why they're remembered, because membership is limited to islands of a maximum of around 125,000 population. So that does restrict the number of islands. But the problem you have is that's more competitors, and how do you deal with those numbers? How do you accommodate them literally? So that's something we're wrestling with. So I can't see that there'll be a massive, as I said, we've just lost Rhodes, unfortunately. So I think people would like to see at least another island come in, and perhaps with a different culture from somewhere else. But then again, if you're unlikely to get a Pacific island, because can you imagine how much it would cost them to come over to a game? So I think it will always stop predominantly as a European. Yeah. The sports is really difficult. I get earache most weeks on the island. Why haven't we got hockey? Why haven't we got rugby, cricket, etc.? And I mean, the difficulty with those three I've mentioned, and I mean, nowadays it's not just the traditional sports. We've got skateboarding, we're even seeing the development of esports, but I don't want to go down that route at the moment. But the traditional sports like hockey, cricket, rugby, etc., netball, the difficulty there is that they're traditionally British Commonwealth sports. And if you said to someone in Scandinavia that we're thinking of introducing hockey, they'd just assume it was ice hockey.
Right.
But again, more sports, more facilities required, more accommodation required, and I think it might almost be a case of a new sport coming in would almost need another sport to drop out. Right. And as you can imagine, people in that sport would be extremely upset. We have the difficulty now with there's 18 sports on the approved list. Some of them you can argue are more than one: sailing, also as windsurfing and sailboarding and beach volleyball and volleyball. So and shooting, different disciplines. So you could argue it's a bit more than 18, but you can pick a 14 maximum, a minimum of 12. It does give other opportunities. I mean, this year there was no gymnastics in Gibraltar. So the Gymnastics Association in the Isle of Man a few weeks ago hosted an inter-island gymnastics competition, and I think there was 10 islands came across to the Isle of Man, including Cayman, Gotland, Owen from Scandinavia. So I was fortunate enough to go down and watch some of that. And
so the door may be closed in one respect, and then other doors open in other areas then, doesn't it, as well? So it's good to see.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to probably draw it round to a bit of a close now, Andy. We're hitting our sort of half-hour mark. That's been some fantastic information there, and I think it really gives us a real snapshot of what goes on and what it takes to make these games happen, not just from a competitive background, but also everything that goes in and around that. So what do you... I suppose my next question is, how do you see the games perhaps... I'm struggling how to ask this question, actually.
Well, I think I probably didn't answer your last question properly, did you? You said about the games developing in the future, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, do you think it might... there could be any changes afoot? I mean, are there any islands banging on the door?
To be honest with you, there aren't, and one of my jobs is that I do get on Google and I do look for sort of islands of the right population. And, you know, certainly we now have, I think, most of the British islands on board. So, and this cost factor is a big one as well, that is a deterrent to people as well. So I think it may sound a little bit unambitious to say that what we want to do is maintain the games. We want, you know, like even the standards of the games, obviously they're always improving every year. One of my jobs in the next few weeks now is producing certificates for everyone who's broken a game's record this time, and there's records broken at every game, so obviously standards are increasing. But I don't think we want it to become over-professional. It fits in, certainly from a Manx perspective, it fits in really well, I think, with the Commonwealth Games. And then, you know, people who are fortunate to get involved with GB and go on to the Olympics, you know, it fits in really nicely that I think a lot of our Commonwealth Games athletes have already been to an Island Games and used that as a stepping stone. And that's great for sport on the island that we've got these opportunities.
So obviously we've had the same sponsor for a long time as well, haven't we? Is it NatWest?
Yeah, they're now NatWest International, which has confused everyone with the title of the games. But yeah, I mean, they're on board for Guernsey. We're hoping they'll extend beyond that for Orkney and even further. But it's a long sponsorship. They've been with us since '98, and that's very unusual for sponsorships of any description. They've been a great sponsor. Again, a lot of my time is liaising with them, and they're great to work with. They're not over-demanding. They want things done correctly, but they're not over-demanding. So I really hope that they'll come on board again. It's our main income, certainly from the IIGA point of view. We do charge every island a few £100 as an annual subscription, but that wouldn't pay the costs of our central administration. Most of the money from NatWest International goes to the host island, so they're the biggest sponsor. They're allowed to get other sponsors as well, but they are the biggest sponsor for every games, because you can imagine a host island is having to fork out at least $1 million, perhaps $1.5 million to host the games. So yeah, it's a little bit of a worry for us, but we're already having to make plans to think about perhaps getting a replacement for NatWest International should they leave us. But our first choice would be that they extend again.
And that just reminded me of probably my last question, which I'll fire it in, Andy, is through the International Island Games Association, do they offer opportunities for sports or islands to gain bursaries for projects and initiatives? Was I right in reading that in recent months?
Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned that, yes. NatWest International have a sport development programme where islands or sports associations on the islands can apply for grants. They're not massive grants. Every island is restricted to a maximum of £2,000 a year. That can be one grant for £2,000 or four for £500, and that relates to training technical officials, coaches or coaching initiatives, general sports development initiatives, things like the Manx Youth Games. Hasn't took advantage of that over the years, but other islands have launched the similar type thing through that as well. And there's also help for travel for individuals and for teams to compete off the island as well. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, they should, from an Isle of Man perspective, they should get hold of IGAM, Island Games Association of Man, because they will need support to be able to submit a grant, and it is restricted to the 18 Island Games sports.
Okay, so that's fantastic. All this is going on, and there's even opportunities there to help support and develop sports as well, along with that. So yeah, don't forget, if you're interested in looking at those bursaries, to go to IGAM to see how you can apply for that. That just leaves me to say a really, really big thank you, Andy. That's been a fantastic half hour. We've got through loads of different information on the Island Games, and hopefully painted a broader picture for people who are listening to the podcast. So this is our August podcast that will be heading out imminently. So if you've got any ideas for people or guests you'd like to hear about in the world of sport, linked to the Isle of Man, then give us a shout. Give us a shout on our Facebook page, Isle of Man Sport Facebook page, or our coaching group as well, Isle of Man Sport Coaches Forum, and we'll do our very best to get some fantastic guests to go through some awesome topics in sport. So thanks very much for your time for listening today, folks. Andy, thank you very much for your time in being our guest today.
Thank you.
Excellent. And we hopefully hear from us very soon for our September edition. Just to add to that, we'll hopefully, for our September edition, have some of our guests from our coaching festival, which is taking place. So you may hear from the likes of Danny Newcombe, Scott McNeil and John Mills. So some fantastic guests coming up in the future. Thanks, folks. Good night.